Hello everyone, I'm Elfowls, coach of the Newport Noctiles, and welcome to another draft analysis. I joined PAC, or the Pokemon All-Star Conference, in their side league Wi-Fi Standard Season 7. Winning this season would guarantee me an invite to the main PAC YouTube season, so I'm hoping to do really well here and put myself on the map for Wi-Fi draft leagues. That's going to be tough though, since I'm competing with 15 other great coaches for that title. As for the season itself, the format is Wi-Fi 6v6 singles, using a draft of 9 to 11 Pokemon on a 110-point budget. It is a Terra Captains format with free typings and Terra Preview, with the conditions being that you can have up to 2 Terra Captains, neither of which can be above 17 points, and their combined value cannot exceed 20 points. In addition to the highest of top tiers being banned from Terra, there are a few extra Terra bans outside the top tiers to keep things balanced. Chi-Yu, Kuma-O, Manaphy, Terapagos, Urshifu Rapid Strike, Annihilate, Dragonite, Ogerpon, Regieleki, Espathra, Ursaluna Blood Moon, Enamorus, and Volcarona are all the mid to high tiers that are not allowed to Terra. So with that being said, let's get started with the draft. I have the 10th pick overall out of 16, so we're pretty darn close to the middle. That's unfortunate, but I think I was able to still grab a pretty great start to my draft. The round 1 picks before me saw pickups including Chien-Pao and Dragapult, which are fast offensive monsters that are always going to be taken early. But there was one more offensive juggernaut like this that was left open all the way until the number 10 pick. So with my first pick in the draft, I grabbed Iron Valiant for 20 points. This is a Pokemon that I've wanted to use in Draft League for a while now, and boy am I excited to use it here. We all know what Iron Valiant does. Its main role is a late game cleaner, using Booster Energy speed to outrun the whole field and clean up with whatever moveset it wants. All of the attacking sets with amazing physical and special coverage, set up with Swords Dance or Calm Mind, or even some utility support like Encore and Disable to disrupt the opponent. This is an incredibly customizable Pokemon. And that's just talking about the booster energy sets, honestly. With 116 speed and incredible offenses on both sides, Iron Valiant can be a viable user of Choice Band, Scarf, or Specs sets, with Trick as an added bonus on those sets, or we can just be a mixed Life Orb attacker for some immediate pressure. There's some great move pool options there. Base 116 speed and stab priority in Vacuum Wave means that I'm starting my draft off with great speed control, which is something that I can sometimes struggle with in my drafts, so I'm happy to start early with this. So to build a team around Iron Valiant, I'll want plenty of bulky attackers and pivots to break the opposing team down into cleaning range, as well as a secondary win condition and probably more speed control options to take some pressure off of Iron Valiant. While we're at it, this is probably one of the best fairy types you can draft, maybe the best, so we might as well get started on a Dragon Fairy Steel Core, and also while I'm at it, I'm also looking for my first Terra Captain. So looking around, I thought Metagross looked like a great deal at 13 points, and Hydreigon is a Pokemon that I've seen paired up with Iron Valiant to great effect, but in the end there was only one Pokemon that I simply could not allow myself to pass up. In round 2, I drafted Kingambit for 16 points as my first Terra Captain. So I don't need to tell you how good free Terra Kingambit is. I mean, it's probably the best Terra Captain available in this format, so I was surprised it even made it this far back to me in the draft. Now, as far as pairing it up with Iron Valiant, if Valiant is the team's late game cleaner that can also break early game, Kingambit is the bulky breaker that can also clean in the late game with Supreme Overlord boosted Sucker Punches. And this thing is so good at either of those roles. It's so strong and bulky that it's almost guaranteed to make progress in some way. Compared to Iron Valiant, the move pool here is fairly humble, seeing as most weeks I'll be just running some combination of Swords Dance, Sucker Punch, Kowtow Cleave, Iron Head, and Terra Blast, but honestly that's just so solid, especially with the unlimited coverage and defensive utility of free Terra. The setup potential of this Pokemon, combined with a ton of bulk as opposed to Iron Valiant's high speed, makes this a great round 2 pick to flesh out this top tier offensive core. So going into round 3, I was very aware that a core like this is definitely looking for some defensive pivots and utility picks to help keep momentum going. If Galarian Slowking had made it back to me, that would have been an instant pickup, but of course that was a pipe dream. It was never going to happen. Looking at some of the defensive pivot options I have though, I feel I can wait a little longer to pick up a few of those pivots, and my motivation here was to grab one more pick that just looked impossible to pass up. I couldn't help myself. Let's finish off our Dragon Fairy Steel Core with Kyurem. Yeah, if you thought Iron Valiant and Terra King Gambit were hard to switch into, how about 130 base special attack Freeze Dry, Draco Meteor, and Earth Power? I'll admit, this pick might be going overboard with the offense, but I ask you, how are you going to prep for the trio of Iron Valiant, King Gambit, and Kyurem? This core goes so hard. It's by far the best Dragon Fairy Steel core I've had the pleasure of working with, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun with it this season. And I think Kyurem slots in pretty well here. It's essentially just another breaker to open things up for Iron Valiant, but the speed tier is a great addition to my offensive lineup, and combined with its incredible bulk, Kyurem wins a lot of matchups 1v1. It's not just a wall breaker either. Setup with Dragon Dance is a little more niche, but it's definitely viable in the right matchup as a win condition. Like I said though, this is mostly a wall breaker and pressure piece. A freeze dry this strong just forces my opponents to prep and play in very specific ways to get around it, which I can hopefully capitalize on with the rest of my team. Okay, with 3 offensive behemoths to work with, I think it's finally time to pick up a defensive pivot going into round 4. With my dragon being part ice type, we have an overall fire weakness, so I might as well pick up a higher tier bulky water now, and I think I found the perfect one for this team with Slowking. This is of course a specially defensive regenerator pivot, but the move I have my eye on is Chilly Reception, which not only gets us a slow momentum move, but it also sets up the snow for Kyurem. And if you thought Kyurem scary enough, imagine it with a 50% defense boost and perfectly accurate blizzards to work with. Yeah, this team just got a whole lot scarier with the pickup of a defensive piece. As for Slowking itself, it's a great Pokemon on its own. The team definitely appreciates resistances to fighting and fire, and all 3 of my offensive pieces enjoy the slow momentum to get in safely. There's a lot of offensive potential here as well. Future Sight pairs up great with Iron Valiant and King Gambit to force progress, and Stab Scald, along with plenty of decent coverage, means that Slowking can hold its own in certain matchups. This is looking to be a pretty strong addition to the team. So next up, we're moving into round 5, and I realized here that I need some hazards and also some removal to work with. I guess King Gambit does have Stealth Rock, but I would be hard-pressed to run it consistently. I don't think King Gambit should be your Stealth Rocker in most weeks. So I decided to pick up a more reliable hazard stacker. My round 5 pick then is going to be Sandy Shocks. And this is not only a Hazards Mon with rocks and spikes, it's also my ground type, as well as a decently fast offensive electric type to pivot in and out with strong volt switches. So hazard stacking, momentum, power, and a useful typing, what more could you ask for? Well, probably more coverage, since we're really just working with stabs plus power gem, but forcing in defensive ground and grass types really isn't the end of the world. You know who loves to prey on defensive ground and grass types? Freeze Dry Kyurem. I really like the offensive pairing there. So we're going to move right along to round 6, and I said I also needed hazard removal, and you might also notice that I don't have any ground resists yet, so we might as well grab both with this slot. Serena was tempting as a grass-type rabbit spinner, but it was sniped, and I found a movement that I liked a little more anyway, probably would have picked up regardless. Defog Talonflame. So this checks off my hazard removal, and it's also a ground immunity as well as a fighting resist for the team. 2 useful abilities are the cherry on top. Flame Body punishes any kind of pivoting with U-turn or just any physical attacks in general, and Gale Wings gives us a nice one-time priority option with Stab Brave Bird. As for the sets we're running, they probably won't be too diverse, with boots being near mandatory in every matchup, but we can make a lot of different moves work. Brave Bird and Flare Blitz for some high base power physical offense. Overheat and Hurricane are options on the special side. Talonflame's special attack isn't that much worse than its physical. We have Will-O-Wisp and Roost for some utility, U-Turn for our 3rd pivot Pokemon, and of course Defog as the reason I drafted Talonflame. I think this is going to offer the team quite a bit of speed and utility, which is very important. So that's going to bring us around to round 7. And here we can see my big spending in the early rounds is starting to come back to me a little bit. Budget is starting to become more of a concern, but we're finding bargains where we can, and I think a great example of that is Weezing for 7 points. I think this is a decently underrated mon that fits the team well. Finally, we have a dedicated physical wall and a dedicated switch into close combats and earthquakes thanks to Levitate. Or alternatively, we can run Neutralizing Gas to be a grounded poison type, absorbing those toxic spikes and canceling out other abilities. This makes Weezing a pretty great answer into Pokemon that rely on certain abilities. Think of things like Guts, Huge Power, and Technician, and how well Weezing works to shut down things like that. And on top of that, Weezing gives me a Toxic Spiker, and it also has plenty of coverage to keep itself from being too passive. Of course, it is a lower tier for a reason, as it tends to get worn down quickly without any reliable recovery, but I think we can expect Weezing to make some big things happen for this team. We're going to take a lot of nice physical hits. So moving on to the last few rounds, I think it's high time we pick up our other Terra captain. Since King Gambit was 16 points, we're limited to 4 points for the other Terra slot, and of my options, I liked Alolan Sandslash the most. So as a 4-pointer, there's actually a lot of utility here. I used Alolan Sandslash before in another league in Gen 8, and I enjoyed it as a utility option with access to Rapid Spin, Stealth Rock and Spikes, and Priority Ice Shard to keep offensive dragons in their place. On this team, we can still make use of all of that utility, but we can also use Slush Rush to make Sandslash a viable win condition in the right matchup. With the Snow set up by Slowking, Sandslash outspeeds everything up through Choice Scarf Garchomp, and with Swords Dance, powerful Ice Stab, and the unlimited coverage of Terra, Sandslash can be a great sweeper. Keep your eye on this guy as a low-tier steal. So moving into round 9, we only have 10 points left, and the team is looking pretty fleshed out already, I'll be honest. So I'm just looking for a few Pokemon that can help with some specific matchups. With that in mind, I'm going to pick up Samurott as my second water type for 5 points. And as a water type, this is a more offensive choice compared to Slowking, with solid mixed attacking stats and good coverage, as well as stab priority in Aqua Jet and a strong momentum move with Flip Turn. Samurott also helps to beef up my middle speed tiers at base 70, and its bulk is better than you might think, actually. I see this as a reasonable Choice Scarf or Band user with a strong Flip Turn to work with, or a decently bulky Assault Vest pivot. One of the main reasons I picked this up was that it's a water type that isn't weak to Ghost or Dark, so it might be able to improve my matchup against certain fire types that would beat Slowking offhandedly, kind of like Ceruledge or Chi-Yu. I think that's useful enough to bring it to at least 1 or 2 matchups. And lastly, in round 10, I only have 5 points remaining, and I decided to cap my draft off at 10 Pokemon instead of 11, so I picked up Lilligant for 5 points. And I picked this up as my grass type to fill out something of a fire-water grass core. Lilligant itself is nothing to write home about, especially if it's not my Terra captain, but it has some decently strong grass type offense with Quiver Dance setup and Choice Scarf sets with Healing Wish as the strongest options I can really think of. Don't get too used to it though, because right after the draft, Grace Period opened up, and we all got to use 2 extra transactions to fix up our teams a little bit. And there was a Pokemon that dropped from a different team that was just too good for me to pass up. I had to make room for it, so I ended up dropping both Weezing and Lilligant right after the draft to free up 12 points. And I don't think I lose too much by dropping Lilligant, but Weezing does hurt. I thought that was a pretty good fit for the team. It is all going to be worth it though, I think, to pick up Amoonguss for 11 points. And would you look at that, now we have a regen core with Amoonguss Slowking. This should provide some longevity that Weezing couldn't, and although we don't have quite the defensive profile of Weezing, Amoonguss can still be very bulky on the physical side with investment and its great natural HP stat. And although we don't have Toxic Spikes anymore, we still have a grounded poison to absorb them, and in fact it is a much more consistent grounded poison than Weezing, which would probably want to run Levitate a decent amount of the time to help its defensive profile. As for the move pool, there isn't too much here outside of the basics, but Toxic is always great chip damage, Spore forces unique prep from the opponent, and Clear Smog as well as Foul Play are great tools to keep setup sweepers in check. Amoonguss should be a key player in stomaching some big hits for the team. Now finally, after that, we do have 1 point remaining for that 10th slot. The pool of 1-pointers is very limited, so don't expect too much out of this last pick. I already think this team of 9 is great, but I decided to grab Tinkatuff as my last point. Tinkatuff has an amazing typing. It's surprisingly bulky with Eviolite boosted defenses. Its speed tier actually plugs in a gap between Samurott and Kyurem. Off the top of my head, I don't actually remember what that speed is, but it's something like 78, or I think it's 78, yeah. And then finally, it has some decent disruption options between Knockoff, Thunderwave, Stealth Rock, and Encore. I could actually see Tinkatuff doing something in a matchup or two. It takes hits from some top tiers surprisingly well, and it can respond back with some very annoying options. And that's more than I can say about a lot of the other 1-point Pokemon. So yeah, that's going to be my draft for this season of the PAC Side League. I am so excited to see what this top 3 can do, supported by a regen core and plenty of pivots. This looks like a team that could make a championship run. With that being said, Week 1 is coming soon, so stay tuned for that. Thank you all, and I'll see you next time.